Hey everyone, I want to show you a game from round 6 of the Geneva FIDE tournament. And this game is between Richard Rapport with the white pieces and Alexander Riazantsev with the black pieces. And as you can see, Richard played B3. Um, so who knows, by the end of his chess career, this might be called the Report opening or Richard opening. Instead, right now it is called the Nimzo Larsen opening or Nimzo Larsen attack, named after Aaron Nimzovich and Ben Larsen. So, or the Jabava opening. Could be either one. So B3, E5. Unfortunately, I want to say is that this opening is often termed a surprise opening. In other words, not to be taken too seriously, especially at the top levels. But what I'm seeing, and I'm sure most of you are seeing out there, is that you're seeing this opening played more and more often. So, and the more something is played, the more it is subject to analysis. So I think it's going to be interesting the next year or so to see the state of this opening. Is this opening going to become increasingly popular because of the analysis, right, and the prospects that perhaps are found for white, or is it going to become relegated basically to the dustbin of top grandmaster level chess like the King's Gambit due to all the opportunities that exist for black in the variation? If I was a betting man, I would say that this opening within a year or so probably won't even be played by Richard or Jabava due to due to the lack of winning chances for the white side in this opening. As long as you can surprise your opponent with it and he's kind of not sure of his path, yes, this opening is decent. But once you study it and look at the games in the line, you see a clear path to equality for black. And so let's look at this game without further ado. So b3, e5, bishop b2, knight c6, e3, and of course the bishop on f1 is going to b5 to indirectly assault this pawn right here. Knight f6, bishop b5, already putting pressure on the e5 pawn, actually threatening to win it. Bishop d6, good move, getting the pieces out, anticipating that black is going to take here anyway, and therefore the line will be open up for the bishop. So this blockage is only temporary. Richard plays knight e2. Let me take a moment to explain that there is another line here, knight a3, which is very important and critical to this line also. In the game Jabava Jakovenko from 2013, we saw Jabava say this move, knight a3, and the idea is to play knight c4 and double up these pawns here, and then you have a real blockade problem on the d file. So sometimes black will play bishop e7 as Jakovenko did here. Now the pawn comes to c4 and you see this double attack from the bishop and knight. So d6, and white usually doubles up those pawns, and then you see knight e2. And Jabava went on to win a good game here. Again, in same variation, knight a3. This is Hikaru Nakamura versus the British GM Gavin Jones. Actually, is he British? I'm not sure. Forgive me. I might have to look that up. I'm not sure if he's, for some reason I wanted to say he was Scottish. But against Gavin Jones, knight a3, e4, knight e2, and then the bishop wind up going to e5, and this was only possible because Nakamura did not play knight c4 immediately. Now he wind up playing it, and then Gavin was able to trade off the bishops there. But if he played knight c4 um, instead of knight e2, the bishop would have had to do something else. Again, here's Ivancho versus Lee Kuan Liam. Knight a3, bishop e7, knight c4, d6. So we see the idea with knight a3. I just wanted to show you one more game real quick with knight a3 because the line is different. This is between Konstantin Sakayev and Evgeny Sveshnikov from 1992. After knight a3, Sveshnikov played knight a5, which is another way of dealing with this idea of knight coming to c4. And is one of the critical lines here. Not only does it deal with the threat of the knight coming to c4, but if you notice, the bishop is now waving at air. What is the bishop going to capture? Okay, so now a6 is coming, just driving the bishop away. And the pawn is protected. So bishop e2. And you saying, well, now what? Well, the knight can't come here, but now the threat is to come here with the knight. Again, with the same idea. This is why you see a6. Now knight c4, and then the knights get traded. In this game, Sakayev opted for b takes c4, which is double-edged. Of course, he could have took with the bishop. This, as you can see, opens the b file for the rook, and this c pawn can be useful in covering critical squares in the center. So we can see white has a nice pawn preponderance in the center. So after a good game, Sveshnikov with the black pieces did go on to win the game. So that concludes, our little foray into the world of knight a3. But I just wanted you to see that there are other options. The other option here, which is particularly not a good one, is knight f3, and you will hardly ever see this move except maybe in a blitz game, something like that, but it's not not really to be recommended. And it's knight f3, and the reason is because of the knight's exposure to the move e4. So in the game Kotanashvili versus Pia Kramling in blitz match, the women's blitz tournament, knight f3, queen e7 was played, h3, castles, and then e4. And the problem is that white has no real good square to put his knight. He would love to, or she would love, in this case, would love to play knight d4, placing the knight in the center. That would be awesome. For example, bishop takes c6. This happens in the Shigorin's defense sometimes, where the bishop will capture on f3. But here, it doesn't really work out. Bishop takes c6, d takes c6, and say we try to hop in the center, right? Queen e5, and then you have this mating threat all of a sudden. There's no adequate way to deal with it. After f4, e takes, and say you try to get slick and take back with the knight, figuring that you did something. Well, the problem is the bishop is hanging. So that doesn't work. So you might say, hey, well, I don't have to capture. I'll just play knight d4 straight away. But then you run into the same difficulties after queen e5, g3, for example, and then knight takes d4. And since you didn't capture, this bishop is hanging. So after bishop takes d4, then queen takes b5. So the only decent alternatives are knight h2 and knight e1. And black just has a great game. Knight e1 was played in the actual blitz contest, and again, this knight is horrible down here, and he's looking forward to bringing the knight out, which he did. But again, this is why the move knight f3 is avoided. Instead, the superior knight e2 knight e2 is played, which avoids that situation of e4, but as you can see, the knight is less, not as influential on the central squares at this point. A6, bishop takes, D takes, D3. Usually, if you look at a lot of games in this line, you'll see white castling. D3, Queen E7. Report decides to stay in the middle. A lot of times, white will also attempt to castle on the queen side too. There's many games in that line with queen side castling from white. But report had something different in mind here. So knight D2, bishop E6, A4, castle, and now black has to use the overused term is giving white a target, a location for his king. And I think that black is totally justified in castling on whatever side of the board he wants, because white really doesn't have anything here. I mean, he basically needs like some type of blunder. What is in white's favor is the pawn structure, and but again, there's many openings like that where white has a favorable pawn structure, but it's just not enough. For instance, when I look at this pawn structure, I think of the exchange variation of the Roy Lopez, but a worse variation for white. I think of the Berlin defense in the Roy Lopez. Again, similar pawn structure, but the thing is that white's e-pawn, black's e-pawn is there on e5, so there's not even a pawn majority that white can try to exploit, like a 4-3 pawn majority on the queen side. So black has more space, 2 bishops, all of his pieces are developed except the rook on h8. So it's hard to speak of any type of initiative or advantage for white. I mean, I guess he's just trying to get a position, but if you're just trying to get a position, why not get a better position than this, which has more prospects and stuff? But who am I, right? This guy's almost 2,700, so it must be working out for him. But I just think that it just shows how talented he is. It's not really the opening, so to speak. It's just the talent level allows, in the play this way. So A5, just restricting the pawns on the queen side, creating more space for development. And what this move does 2 things besides restricting black's pawns on the queen side. For instance, black can't really play b6 or anything like that without risking that queen side being opened up. Another thing it does is it just opens up room for the rook to be developed. If you look at the position, where else is the rook gonna go? And when I say where's it gonna go and actually contribute to the game? There's nowhere else. The D and E files are jammed up with pieces, right? There's 4 pieces, right? And you talk about a cramped living quarters. D1, E1, E2, and D2 all cramped up with pieces, and there's no way the rook's gonna go there and be effective. All of the files are closed pretty much. So A5 allows the rook to be able to at least come out here and breathe a little bit. This explains black's move also. Again, the best place to develop this rook is right where it's at on the H file. The D and E files are all jammed up. Rook A4, H4, H3, knight D7. That knight is coming to C5, and it's also freeing up this pawn right here to either go to F6, right, fortifying the center, or F5. It depends. If white was a castle over here, there's a ready-made system of attack with G5, G4, F5, F4. The bishops are pointed over there, so it could get serious real quick. Report plays Queen A1. This is like a common theme in these openings, especially like ready systems where the queen gets behind the bishop and makes a battery against the center here. Knight C5 hitting that rook. The rook has to go back. And notice black is not being a copycat, but is in a certain way. He develops his rook in the same fashion. It's just that it happens to be the position on the board you know, is very closed at this time, and this is, if you want to get the rooks in the game, you have to do it in this manner. Bishop C3, Rook G5, and you see he's found an effective, Riazantsev that is found an effective place for the rook. Here, black is already better. Rook G1, F6, so he just fortifies the center because white is showing, hey, I'm not going to castle over there. He feels his safest place for his king is right in the center behind this. I don't know, what do you want to call this? An igloo of pawns from C2, D3, E3, F2, igloo of pawns. That's what we have. So Rook B2. So that is not a castle, it is an igloo. Rook B2 is played, and the idea here is to try to open up things on the queen side, open up some files. Queen F7, B4, knight D7, knight E4 hitting that rook, Rook G6, and now Queen A3, and now Queen F8, making it somewhat difficult to play this move right here. Now I didn't explain what was going on after Queen A3. I don't want you, because I know some of you don't know like the meaning behind some of these moves. Queen A3, the threat right here is simply, well, I'm not gonna say simply. You got to look into it. But the threat here, or idea rather, is let's just give white another move. Let's imagine white can move again. White would play knight takes D6, C takes, and then the move B5. And on C takes B5, Queen D6, opening up the position. And this would be alright for white. White wouldn't be winning or nothing like that, but this is definitely good for him. And instead of C takes B5, if A takes B5, then A6. And of course, not capturing, but B6 trying to keep the position closed, and then Queen D6 again. But again, this is good for white. This is why Riazantsev, after Queen A3, backed his bishop up with Queen F8. Okay, so just those little nuances are important. So knight takes C5, knight C5, knight takes C5, B takes C5, B takes C5. Bishop B4, so a whole bunch of pieces just went off the board here. And white has gotten the B file open, but now it's a problem of exactly how to take advantage here. And by the way, this pawn is up for grabs, but right now you can't do it because the queen on A3 would be hanging. So Riazantsev plays C5, which wasn't the most accurate move to deal with the threat. This move right here, Bishop D5, is very strong because it attacks this pawn one more time. You see the rook has been sitting here a while. The Bishop D5 adds to it. Now, if E4, that will be anti-positional on white's part, because then he would be cutting his pieces off from the other side of the board here. And for example, nice in-between move. Now a move like C5, and let's say Rook B2, Bishop C6. This would be good for black. So for example, F3, F5, and white's pieces are you know, uncoordinated in a terrible manner. Instead, let me just show you this line. After bishop D5, King F1, for instance. Remember I told you this pawn was being attacked. So King F1 to protect it, and then E4 again with the same idea, creating the wedge in the position. Knight F4, Rook G5. Say Queen C3 for example, and then again the position starts getting opened up in black's favor. and this becomes very dangerous for white. Again, you see the pieces all discombobulated. Instead of bishop d5, which I say is the better move, c5 was played. This provokes this move. Rook takes h4, and then now f5, basically coming to arrest the white king. Rook h5, king b8, and now Rapport plays a bold move, g4, f takes g4, rook takes e5, and it's interesting aesthetically looking at the little igloo around the king. The king is right in the middle of the board and seems relatively safe. Riazantsev plays queen f6, attacking the rook. Queen takes c5. So what we see is a whole bunch of pawns being picked up here by Rapport. And g takes h3. But the important pawn is that h pawn right now that needs to be stopped. Rook takes, and queen takes. And just taking a quick assessment of material, we see that the material is even. Each side has 5 pawns, right? Black has a bishop, white has a knight, rook, and queen. However, this dangerous passed pawn on the h file is, to me, what makes the difference here. That gives black the nod, and his king is a little bit safer. Even though white's king has that little igloo or hut, whatever you want to call it, or TP, that looks really shady to me. But again, the most salient feature in this position is that pawn on h3. So let's see. So queen e7 attacking the rook, and the bishop on e6. Rook e8, queen to h4, and now we see the bishop just getting out of dodge and basically protecting the queen, protecting the king, and keeping an eye on this pawn. Rapport offers an endgame: queen h5, queen takes, rook takes. So the rook is behind the pawn, but again can't really capture it. So it's going to need at least the knight to help him. Maybe the knight to f4 or g3 and some g1 and some variations to help. Riazantsev plays g6, just tapping the rook on the shoulder, and rook g5 is played. Now if he tries to stay behind the pawn, then black can play a move like rook e5, threatening a5, and then for example knight f4, rook takes, and then knight takes g6, and if knight takes h3, this loses to rook a1. So for example king e2, and then the rook is able to pin this knight to the rook. So you have to be very careful in the little igloo position there. So rook g5 is played, h2 threatening the queen, and now knight g3 by Richard. Rook h8 forcing the knight to blockade, rook h5, and now rook g2. Again, if rook takes g6, then this pawn falls. And then, for example, if a move, if a move like rook h6, for instance, trying to win this, then you have the same problem of dropping this knight on h1. So, white's king safety is a big question mark in this game. So rook h5, rook g2, Rook takes a5, and here is to me the critical point of the game. We had this theme that I've just been showing to you of Rook A1 and picking up this knight due to the lack of horizontal safety for the king. But here Richard could just take the pawn, and then if check, there's no problem because the knight is protected. And this line will run as follows. Black will still be better because he has the outside pass pawn on the a file. So for instance, after rook takes h2, rook h5, this forces the trade of rooks, and this is what I believe Richard might have been afraid of or overlooked. Rook takes h5, g takes h5. So now the problem here is you got a pass pawn on the h file and the a file. So it's kind of like, how are you going to stop that? One, on the h file, you have to keep the knight over there, and then you have to rush the king over to the a file. So this is just a sample line, and you see these pawns kind of racing up the board here. And king d2 to get over to the pawn on the a file, h3, and this pretty much paralyzes the knight. d4, and I think let's play a move like c6. And I think this is what Richard probably saw and is trying to avoid this situation right here, where I would say that white is pretty much lost. But I think it was better than what actually took place in the game. In that there's more things to, for black to try to figure out. In other words, it makes the win more difficult instead of direct. Like for instance here, if f6, and simply bishop e6 stops everything, and that's why c6 is played there. So it kind of kills the movement of these pawns. For instance, if e5, then the f pawn drops. So all of these pawns are dead pretty much. And this allows the black king to come out and start stealing, basically. For instance, let me just show you a little more. So for instance, after c4, king c7, let's say king c3, b5, connecting the pawns, c takes, c takes. Let's just say king b4, which is kind of an illusion because this pawn can't be captured because this guy runs. And let's say king d7, knight g3, h2, making sure the knight can't go anywhere. And now this move is a killer. And again, this should be enough to let so you can see the point. This king can't capture because this guy runs. This guy can't go too far, and these pawns are pretty much cannon fodder. The only defense here is a move like d5, but what that does is weaken the dark squares, and now the king can just enter these squares. So for instance, knight f2, see king e7, try to get a little zugzwing situation going on there. Knight h1. And you have to be very careful. I wanted to show you this right here because at the f6, like if you try to take, then you get this situation, knight g4. So you always got to be vigilant. Instead, you want to come in with f6. You just hang around. Bishop c8, and you just take your time. But anyway, this is a winning situation for white. You would just work your way around. The basic plan is to work your way around with the king, like with patience, avoiding the knight fork. Just work your way around with the king. You just slowly, gradually either win these pawns or win this knight. Okay, so I just wanted to share that with you. Instead, during the game, so this is again, that ending is why I think Richard did not play rook takes h2. Instead, he played King D2, trying to, get over to the other side of the board, figuring he could just capture this at some point. However, the problem is the Rook H5 protecting the pawn, and that's the most dangerous pawn on the board. So Riazantsev basically traded the G6 pawn in for the H pawn, which he liked to keep. And now we see the same scenario, except the H pawn is still living instead of the G pawn. But now Richard is over closer with his king, which is what he wanted to do. You figure he has his blockade, and the king over here, so he'll be able to hang in there. But again, ladies and gentlemen, is this really what you want out of the opening? Because he basically had no never really had an edge or anything. It was like black just equalized and then just put a lot of pressure on white, and then that was, now you're in this position. And last few remaining moves, we see Richard desperately trying to push his pawns to make some kind of threat of queening himself. And Riazantsev is very experienced, and he just plays super strong, just attacking everything. He finally gives up the H pawn, but he gives it up for 2 pawns. Bishop comes to C6, check, check again, Rook D1, Knight C1, and A3, and that's all she wrote. And Rapport had to resign. The threat is A2, forcing the king away, and then you just capture the knight on C1. So that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps it up for that game. And for Richard Rapport's game today. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a little bit about this. Learned a little bit more about this opening, and the downside of playing like this and giving up the center early in the game. I mean, you'll hear a lot of heroic stories with this opening because you see these top guys playing it and stuff like that. But I think the reality of it is that it's a little on the suspect side. But again, if you're playing like blitz or something, or like minute chess or whatever, but I mean, to try this in a slow game. But again, who am I? There's many grandmasters. Evancho. I think I showed you a couple of games. There's Jabava. There's these guys. So to each his own. But again, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you on the next video.